Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are plunging headfirst into, well, one of the big ones. Really challenging stuff, Plato's Parmenides.
Yeah, definitely a challenge. And for this deep dive, we're using Benjamin Jowett's translation and analysis from Project Gutenberg. He gives us some great excerpts and commentary on this notoriously difficult dialogue.
Absolutely. So our mission really is to try and, navigate this ancient text, pull out the core ideas, and maybe understand why it's had philosophers scratching their heads for, well, centuries.
It's fundamental stuff. We'll meet the key players, Parmenides, Zeno, young Socrates. We'll see this really powerful critique of abstract ideas, maybe even Plato's own early ideas.
And then there's the main event, isn't there? This legendary dialectical work.
Oh, yeah. It gets deep into questions about existence, unity, the one, the many. It's intense.
So get ready to stretch your brain a bit. This is where philosophy really starts, digging into the foundations of how we think about what is. Okay, let's paint the picture. Ancient Athens. We've got these visitors from Elea. First, there's Parmenides. He's older, respected, described as having this awful presence, like serious gravitas.
Right, a philosophical heavyweight. And with him is Zeno younger. And the text makes a point of saying, very good looking.
Ah, yes, quite the duo. And who walks in but a young Socrates, still finding his feet philosophically, but already known for being sharp. Keen as a Spartan hound, the source says.
Love that description. So the chat starts with Zeno. He's laying out his paradoxes.
Right, the famous ones about motion and stuff.
Right.
He's not just playing games, is he?
No, no. He's defending Parmenides' big idea, the all is one. Zeno's method is basically saying, look, if you assume things are many, divided, well, you end up with absurdities, contradictions.
So it's an indirect proof for unity. Makes sense. Young Socrates jumps in, though. He gets the method, but...
But he applies it to, like, everyday things, visible stuff.
Yeah, like himself. He says, look, showing that I have many parts, left side, right side, top, bottom, but I'm still one person. Well, okay, that's true, but it's not exactly mind-blowing. A truism, he calls it.
And that's the turning point, because Socrates says, okay, forget physical stuff. What if we apply this sharp Zeno-style thinking to ideas?
The forms, like abstract concepts, likeness itself, unlikeness, the one, the many, rest, motion, things he thinks exist separately, right?
Exactly. He's confident about the big ones, justice, beauty, goodness. But he gets a bit shaky when it comes to ideas of, say, man, water, fire.
And then he really hesitates about things he calls laughable, like hair, mud, filth.
Yeah. The idea of a perfect eternal form of mud, Socrates finds that a bit much.
I can see why it feels a bit undignified, maybe.
And that's where old Parmenides steps in with his first bit of wisdom. Gently, he says, Socrates, that hesitation, that's youth. True philosophy, mature philosophy, won't despise even the meanest things.
So the analysis suggests, this is a hint maybe, that philosophy needs to cover everything, not just the nice ethical concepts, but mud too.
Kind of, yeah. It's about understanding the structure of all reality. And then Parmenides points out something else crucial about Socrates.
What's that?
He says Socrates needs more dialectical training. And this isn't just asking questions, Socratic method style. It's something more rigorous, more like Zeno's systematic approach. This deep, methodical examination of concepts. Parmenides basically says it's the only way to get to truth.
Okay, so Parmenides has set the stage. He's shown Socrates needs this tougher training, and now he turns that sharp mind onto Socrates' own beloved theory of ideas. Let's break down this critique. These are some heavy hitters.
They really are. Problems philosophers still wrestle with. First, big one, participation. How do actual things, like this specific table, partake in the abstract idea of tableness?
Right. How does the particular connect to the universal form?
Parmenides lays out a dilemma. Does the table partake of the whole idea of tableness? If so, how can that one single idea be entirely in this table and every other table all at the same time? Doesn't the one idea become many?
Like one sail covering lots of people. Each person doesn't get the whole sail.
Exactly. That's Parmenides' analogy. So, okay, maybe the table partakes of only a part of the idea.
But how does that work? How can part of greatness make something great? A part is smaller than the whole. Or even weirder, how can a part of smallness make something small?
It seems impossible, right? Parmenides pushes this, and as the analysis notes, participation starts looking like just a nice phrase, a figure of speech, but explaining the how is really, really hard. Socrates himself admits it's not an easy question.
Yeah, it falls apart pretty fast when you poke it.
Mhm.
Okay, participation's a huge hurdle. What's next?
Next up is the famous, maybe infamous, third man argument. It flows right out of the participation problem.
Okay, hit me with it.
So, Socrates thinks great things are great because they participate in the separate idea of greatness. Okay. Now, says Parmenides, think about the idea of greatness itself and all the individual great things together. Don't they all share the quality of greatness?
Yeah, they're all great, the idea and the things.
Right. But the theory says if a bunch of things share a quality, there must be a separate idea to explain that shared quality. So if the first idea of greatness and the great things also share greatness, doesn't that mean you need another second idea of greatness to explain that shared quality?
Oh, dear. So you have greatness 1, the great things,
Yeah.
and now greatness 2, explaining why greatness 1 and the things are both great.
Exactly. And then Parmenides points out you can group greatness 1, the things, and greatness 2. They all share greatness. You need greatness 3.
It never ends. An infinite regress.
Precisely. May go on to infinity, as the text says. And an infinite regress isn't really an explanation, is it? It's just pushing the problem back. It's seen as a major flaw.
Definitely not what you want in a foundational theory. Okay, participation, third man, devastating. Does Socrates try anything else?
He does. He suggests, well, maybe ideas aren't separate things out there. Maybe they're just thoughts only in our minds.
Okay, mental concepts, not external realities.
That Parmenides shoots that down pretty quick. A thought has to be a thought of something, right? Something real. And if the world partakes in these ideas, and ideas are just thoughts, does that mean rocks and trees and mud start thinking when they participate?
Yeah, that sounds unmeaning, as Socrates admits. Okay, so not just thoughts. What else?
He tries another angle. Maybe ideas are like perfect paradigms or types out there in nature, and things in the world just resemble them, like a model and its copies.
Okay, so things are like the idea of beauty because they resemble it?
But Parmenides hits it again. Resemblance itself is a relation, a quality. If a thing resembles the idea of likeness, then the thing and the idea of likeness are, well, alike. They share the quality of likeness.
Oh, no, not again.
Yep. So now you need another idea of likeness to explain that likeness. Another infinite regress, just like the third man, but based on resemblance. Parmenides says this idea of participation by likeness has to be given up too.
Wow. He's just dismantling the theory piece by piece. Paradigms based on resemblance are out.
It's pretty brutal. And then comes what might be the deepest cut, the knowledge problem.
Okay, what's this one?
Parmenides argues that these ideas, if they exist as Socrates thinks, are absolute. They exist purely in relation to each other. Absolute likeness relates to absolute unlikeness, absolute greatness to absolute smallness, and so on. They don't relate directly to the particular relative things in our sphere, the things we actually experience.
So there's like a gap, a huge divide between the perfect world of ideas and our messy particular world.
Exactly. A chasm, as the analysis puts it. And if that's true, Parmenides says, then absolute knowledge, the kind that would grasp these pure ideas, relates only to absolute truth, the ideas themselves. Our knowledge, human knowledge, which deals with particulars, relates only to particular truths in our world.
So, if the ideas are absolute and separate, we can't actually know them, because our knowledge is stuck down here with particulars.
That seems to be the implication. Parmenides asks, the beautiful and the good in their own nature are unknown to us. And Socrates, sounding maybe a bit defeated, says, it would seem so. If the ideas are truly separate, our human minds might not be able to reach them.
That feels really problematic for a theory that's supposed to explain reality. The ultimate reality is unknowable. What's the point?
It's a massive problem, and it leads to what Parmenides calls a monstrous consequence.
Oh boy, what now?
Well, if absolute knowledge belongs to God, and God's knowledge relates only to these absolute separate ideas, does that mean God knows absolute justice, but has no knowledge of human things? No knowledge of us, our world, our actions?
Whoa, that is monstrous. A God completely detached from and ignorant of the world.
It's a shocking implication, maybe deliberately provocative, that follows from taking that separation between ideas and particulars to its logical extreme. Socrates immediately agrees it's a monstrous conclusion.
Okay, so just to recap, huge problems with participation, the third man regress, ideas as just thoughts, ideas as paradigms based on resemblance, this massive knowledge gap, and the monstrous idea of God not knowing us.
Yep. Parmenides basically says, look, these problems are incredibly hard to solve, maybe nearly impossible to understand. Convincing anyone of this theory is tough. But,
I
and this is the crucial twist, he also says, if you just give up on ideas entirely, if you do away with ideas, then you utterly destroy the power of reasoning.
Wow. So the theory seems broken, but ditching it makes thinking impossible. You're caught.
Completely caught,
You
a
can
real philosophical bind. And this is why Parmenides says Socrates needs that dialectical training. He needs the tools to navigate this. So Parmenides agrees to show him how it's done.
Right.
Ah,
The dialectical workout, using his own concept.
oh,
The one.
exactly. Get ready. This is where it gets really intricate. The method is super strict. Take a hypothesis, like if the one is. Explore all the consequences for the one itself and for everything else, the others. Then take the opposite hypothesis, if the one is not, and do the same thing, explore all consequences for the one and for the others. Consider them in themselves and in relation to each other.
It sounds systematic to the point of exhaustion. A roundabout progress through all things, he calls it.
That's the idea. He says it's the only way to get to truth. And he picks Aristoteles, the youngest guy there, to be his respondent, figuring he'll just answer yes or no and not argue too much, makes the demonstration quicker.
Smart move. Poor Aristoteles, though. Okay, let's try and follow along. Hypothesis 1. If the one is, where does Parmenides start?
He starts by asking, what if the one is just one? Like absolutely simple, pure unity, if one is one.
Okay, pure oneness, no parts, no complex.
Right. If it has no parts, Parmenides argues, it can't be a whole. A whole has parts. It can't have a beginning, middle, or end. Those imply parts or limits. No shape. Shape implies parts and limits. It can't be in a place. That implies being contained or having parts in space.
So it loses all spatial properties.
And more. No motion. Change implies different states or parts. No rest. Staying put implies being in a place. It can't be the same as itself, sameness is a relation, or different from anything else. No likeness, no unlikeness, no equality, no inequality.
It seems like it can't be anything describable.
Exactly. It can't even be in time, because time involves succession, duration, like having parts, past, present, future. If it has absolutely no properties, no relations, it's unknowable, unspeakable. It basically amounts to nothing.
Wow. So the purest definition of one leads to nothingness.
That's the first conclusion. Aristoteles just says, I think not. Clearly finding that unacceptable.
Okay, so absolute simple unity doesn't work. What's the alternative under if the one is?
Parmenides shifts slightly. What if the one is, in the sense that it partakes of being? Not just one identity, but one exists, predication.
Okay, so now it's not just unity, it's existing unity.
Right. But now, Parmenides argues, the concept one that is has two aspects. One and being. They are distinguishable.
Okay, like two components within the idea.
And if it has these two components, one and being, each of those must also partake of the other. The one part is and the being part is one. So each part contains both again.
Wait, this sounds familiar, like that regress argument?
It's very similar.
Yeah.
Parmenides says this means the one that is must have infinite parts. One being one being one, endlessly subdividing. If the one is in this sense, it's not simple anymore. It becomes infinitely many.
The one becomes infinitely many. That's the opposite of one.
It seems totally contradictory, yeah. But he's pushing the logic of partaking and being. And he doesn't stop there. If the one is and has infinite parts, it can also be seen as a whole made of those parts. If it's a whole, it's limited by being that specific whole. So it's finite.
Hold on. It was just infinitely many, and now it's finite too.
Yep. Infinite and finite. And if it's a whole with parts, it must be in itself. The whole contains the parts. But anything that is must be somewhere, so it must also be in another. In space or in a subject.
Both in itself and in another place.
Right. And if it's in itself, it's at rest. If it's in another, it's in motion, relative to that other. So the one, if it exists in this way, is both in motion and at rest.
Moving and not moving. Simultaneously. That's impossible.
It certainly sounds like it. And the contradictions just keep piling up. If it's moving and resting, it must be the same as itself in its resting aspect and different from itself in its moving aspect. It must be like and unlike itself and others, equal and unequal.
This is making my head spin.
And then he brings in time. If the one is, partakes of being, and being happens in time, was, is, shall be, then the one must exist in time. It becomes older and younger than itself and others, and also the same age, and also neither older nor younger. All the paradoxes of time apply to the one.
So this supposedly simple, eternal one gets tangled in all the messy contradictions of time and change.
Exactly. And if it exists and has all these properties, it is knowable, it can be talked about, which contradicts the conclusion from the first interpretation that the purely simple one was unknowable nothingness.
Okay, so the second path under if the one is seems to drown the one in a sea of contradictions.
Hmm.
It's one and many, infinite and finite, moving and resting, same and different. It's everything and its opposite all at once.
Pretty much a complete meltdown of coherent description. Now, what about the others, everything else, assuming the one is?
Right. What happens to the rest of reality?
Well, if the one exists, the others must exist too. They are distinct from the one and from each other. To be distinct things, they need parts, they need to be wholes, they need number, which means they must partake in the one for unity and maybe in number.
So they connect to the one somehow. How does that affect them?
Parmenides argues that the others, by their nature, are multiple, different. Left alone, they'd be infinite, infinitely divisible. But if they partake in the one to get unity and structure, they become limited, finite. So the others, too, become both infinite in their potential multiplicity and finite through participation. They also unite opposites within themselves.
Okay. But what if the one is, but it's that totally separate, simple one from the first attempt? The one that had no parts?
Good question. Parmenides considers that too. If the one is absolutely simple and separate with no parts, then the others cannot partake of it. Not the whole, it has no whole. Not parts, it has no parts.
And if they can't partake of the one?
Then they can't get unity. They can't get number. They can't be one thing or many things. They can't have opposite qualities like likeness and likeness, because having two qualities implies some kind of unity or number, like duality.
So if the one exists but is totally cut off, the others lose all definition.
They become nothing, indefinable, qualityless. So, under hypothesis 1, if the one is, we seem to end up with three options, all bad. The one is nothing, or the one is a bundle of contradictions, or everything else is nothing.
Yikes. Okay. Deep breath. Now for hypothesis 2. If the one is not, this sounds even weirder.
It is pretty counterintuitive. Parmenides starts cleverly. He says, look, even to say the one is not, we have to know what one means. We have to be able to think about this one which is not. It's a distinct concept.
Okay, yeah, I can think of the non-existent one.
And because we can think about it and distinguish it, Parmenides argues this one which is not must participate in certain concepts. It must be different from things that are. It must have otherness. It must be unlike things that are, but maybe like itself in its non-being. It must have inequality. It's not equal to things that are, and therefore greatness and smallness, and even equality.
Hang on. How can something that doesn't exist participate in anything, let alone likeness or size?
Here's a really slippery move. Parmenides argues that the statement the one is not is true. And anything that is true, he implies, is, in some sense, it has the being of truth. So the non-existent one must partake of being.
The non-existent one is?
Yeah.
Because it's true that it isn't. My brain hurts. That feels like a philosophical knot.
Welcome to the peak of the workout. And because this non-existent one now partakes of both being, the truth of its non-existence, and not being, its definition, Parmenides argues this implies change, motion, a sort of flickering between being and not being. But how can something that's nowhere move? He concludes the non-existent one must be both in motion and at rest, changing and unchanging, coming into being and being destroyed, while also not doing any of those things.
More contradictions. Even non-existence explodes into paradox.
It seems so under this intense scrutiny. Okay, final step. What about the others if the one is not?
Right. What's left of reality if there's no fundamental one?
Parmenides suggests if the others still exist somehow, they are just other than each other. But without the one, there's no basis for unity or number. They can't be counted. They exist as just an indeterminate, potentially infinite multitude. Think of like dust particles, infinitely divisible, without any principle to group them.
Chaos, basically. Undefined multiplicity.
Kind of. And they might appear to have qualities like seeming one or many or like or unlike, but these are just fleeting appearances, relative illusions in the chaos. True unity, true number isn't there because the one isn't there.
But didn't the earlier theory suggest the one was needed for any distinctness or quality?
Exactly. So the other possibility is, if the one is truly necessary for unity, number, and definition, and the one is not, then the others can't be one or many. They can't appear to be anything. They can't partake in any quality.
So if the one is not, the others are also nothing.
That's the conclusion of that branch. So this whole mind-bending exercise, exploring if the one is and if the one is not for both the one and the others, leads to Parmenides' grand, baffling summary. Whether one is or is not, one and the others in relation to themselves and to one another, all of them in every way are and are not, and appear to be and appear not to be.
And poor Aristotle, after all that, just says, Most true. Probably just wants it to be over. Okay, wow, we survived the workout. Barely. It just seemed to tear everything down. One, many, being, not being, all dissolving into paradox. So what on earth was the point of that demolition job? Was Plato just showing off?
Huh. It definitely feels like showing off sometimes, but no, there's a much deeper purpose. The analysis suggests this whole second part, the workout, is a kind of philosophical purification, a critique. It's a reductio ad absurdum, showing that if you take these fundamental concepts, the one being maybe even Plato's own early ideas about forms, and push them with extreme logical rigor without careful definitions, you end up in contradiction.
Ah, so it's like a stress test for our basic concepts, showing where they break if we're not careful.
Exactly that. It really highlights how slippery concepts like one and being are, especially if we haven't properly figured out how language and thought actually connect to reality. Some paradoxes pop up because we might be sliding between different meanings of a word, like is.
You mean like confusing is meaning identity, this is this, versus is meaning it has a quality, this is blue, versus is meaning it exists, this is. Or maybe one as a single unit versus one as a unified whole.
Precisely. Jowett's analysis points out these subtle shifts are key to how the arguments work, but also where the confusion creeps in. It also warns against treating abstract ideas like unity as if they were physical things you could chop up or put in a location. That leads straight to paradox, too.
So Parmenides is basically showing, look how easily our fundamental tools of thought can tie us in knots if we're not incredibly careful.
That's a perfect way to put it. It's a purgation, clearing out fuzzy, unexamined assumptions. By showing the contradictions, he's not saying nothing is true. He's showing we need better tools, a more rigorous method to understand truth. It forces the mind to look for more nuanced ways to grasp reality's building blocks.
So the goal isn't skepticism, it's demanding better philosophical discipline.
Exactly. And the analysis suggests this dialogue points towards Plato's later work. After showing the dangers here, he goes on in dialogues like the Sophist and Philebus to develop methods of careful classification and division of ideas. It also hints we need a better understanding of the mind itself, how we grasp ideas, a kind of rational psychology.
And this ties back to that big problem from the first half, right? That chasm between the absolute ideas in our everyday world, between absolute truth and human knowledge.
Yes, absolutely. Parmenides pushes that problem to its breaking point in the workout. He shows the absurdities that follow if you make the separation too crude or analyze the concepts too simplistically. It's a challenge that, honestly, philosophy is still dealing with. Think of Kant and the limits of reason. How do we bridge that gap?
And that distinction we saw in the workout between saying one is one, just identity, and one has being, it exists, participates, that seems crucial.
Totally crucial. The whole exercise hinges on how easily those can be confused if you're not paying attention. So ultimately, by taking apart these very simple everyday ideas, is one part whole, Plato, through Parmenides, is forging, as the analysis says, new weapons for philosophy, sharper tools to think more clearly about everything else.
So there you have it, our deep dive into Plato's Parmenides.
We went from that initial meeting in Athens through that tough critique of the theory of ideas and then into that really intense dialectical workout, the one that seemed to just dissolve everything into contradictions.
But as we've seen, the point wasn't just to say, oh, well, nothing makes sense. It was really about doing the hard, essential work of philosophy, examining the most basic tools we think with, the ideas we usually just take for granted, like one or is, and seeing where they buckle under pressure.
Yeah, it's a powerful reminder that even the simplest words hide incredible complexity, layers of meaning, and potential pitfalls if you're not careful.
So what does this mean for you listening along? Well, maybe the next time you find yourself talking about unity or being or even just describing something as, one thing with many parts, just take a second. Think about that tangled web of ideas underneath, those different meanings of is, those potential contradictions that Parmenides dragged out into the open right there in ancient Greece. It definitely pushes you to think a bit harder about the foundations of your own thoughts.